Trump just exploded. And this time it's over a Ronald Reagan advertisement that sent shockwaves through North American trade relations. In a stunning late-night social media outburst, the U.S. president terminated all trade negotiations with Canada, calling Ontario's anti-tariff ad campaign fake and egregious.
The U.S. trade war with Canada. He is ending all negotiations over tariffs in a surprise move late last night because of this ad, which Ontario paid for to run on U.S. television.
But over the long run, such trade barriers hurt every American worker and consumer. America's jobs and growth are at stake.
Using an address from Ronald Reagan, that's some of the ad that triggered Trump's rage, and he now appears to be flipping over the table on trade talks a little over 2 weeks after what appeared to be a cordial meeting between Prime Minister Mark Carney and Donald Trump at the White House. It's unclear right now if Carney had any warning of this. As we've been reporting, the two leaders have been texting and talking on the phone throughout what has been a grinding negotiation process. Chris Reyes is covering the U.S. story for us and leads off our coverage. So this decision late last night, Chris, it was after 11 p.m. Eastern, apparently out of the blue, and he's saying more this morning again on his social media platform. What is the latest?
Yeah, I mean, you're right on the money describing President Trump's reaction. And it really all started, Heather, with the Ronald Reagan Foundation coming out last night, taking issue with Ontario's ad using.
But here's the twist. The ad uses Reagan's own words against tariffs, and now it's blown up into an international incident that could reshape the entire economic relationship between these two nations. So what exactly happened, and why did a simple television commercial trigger such a massive diplomatic crisis? To understand this, we need to dive deep into the escalating trade war that's been brewing between Trump and Canada, a conflict that's far more complex and dangerous than most people realize. The advertisement at the center of this storm wasn't created by Canada's federal government. It came from Ontario Premier Doug Ford, one of Canada's most vocal critics of American tariffs. The 60-second spot features excerpts from Ronald Reagan's April 1987 radio address, where the former Republican president made a compelling case against protectionist trade policies. In the ad, Reagan's voice carries a warning that resonates across decades. When someone says, "Let's impose tariffs on foreign imports," it looks like they're doing the patriotic thing by protecting American products and jobs. And sometimes for a short while it works, but only for a short time. Over the long run, such trade barriers hurt every American worker and consumer in the long run. Ford's strategy was both brilliant and provocative. By using Reagan, a beloved figure among conservative Republicans, to criticize Trump's signature economic policy, Ontario was essentially turning Trump's own party's icon against him. The ad was strategically placed on major U.S. networks, including during high-profile sporting events like the Major League Baseball World Series. Ford even called himself a big Ronald Reagan fan and said his government would spend $75 million to broadcast this message across every Republican district in America. But Trump's reaction was swift and furious. Late Thursday night, he posted on Truth Social that the Ronald Reagan Foundation had just announced that Canada had fraudulently used an advertisement, which he called fake, featuring Ronald Reagan speaking negatively about tariffs. He claimed the ad was designed to interfere with a pending Supreme Court case about his tariff powers and declared that based on their egregious behavior, all trade negotiations with Canada are hereby terminated.
U.S. President Donald Trump has announced tonight he is terminating trade talks with Canada, blaming an anti-tariff ad by Ontario for the reason. Trump posted this message on social media saying, "The Ronald Reagan Foundation has just announced that Canada has fraudulently used an advertisement which is fake, featuring Ronald Reagan speaking negatively about tariffs. The ad was for $75,000. They only did this to interfere with the decision of the U.S. Supreme Court and other courts. Tariffs are very important to the national security and economy of the USA. Based on their egregious behavior, all trade negotiations with Canada are hereby terminated. Thank you for your attention to this matter."
Here's where it gets interesting. Reagan actually did criticize tariffs in that 1987 speech. The ad wasn't fake. It was edited, but the substance was authentic. Reagan spent nearly 5 minutes in that radio address explaining why tariffs inevitably lead to retaliation by foreign countries and the triggering of fierce trade wars. He argued that high tariffs result in artificially high prices and ultimately lead to job losses. Even Reagan's own presidential library has the full speech posted on YouTube, labeled as unrestricted for public use. The Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation did push back, claiming the ad misrepresents Reagan's remarks and that Ontario didn't seek permission to use them. But legal experts point out that Reagan's speech is in the public domain, and using excerpts from public addresses is standard practice in political advertising. The foundation's complaint seems to be more about context than legality. Trump's explosive reaction reveals something crucial about the current state of U.S.-Canada relations. This isn't just about one advertisement, it's the culmination of months of escalating tensions that have pushed the world's longest undefended border to the brink of a full-scale trade war. The numbers tell the story. Trump has imposed a crushing 35% tariff on Canadian goods that aren't covered by the existing U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. He's also slapped sector-specific levies that are devastating key Canadian industries, 50% on metals and 25% on automobiles. For Ontario, which hosts the bulk of Canada's automotive manufacturing, these tariffs are an existential threat to thousands of jobs and billions in economic activity. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has been trying to negotiate his way out of this crisis for months. His approach has been markedly different from Ford's combative strategy. Carney has opted for diplomatic face-to-face meetings and even friendly text messages with Trump. He's tried flattery and accommodation, even rescinding Canada's digital services tax to appease the American president, but none of it has worked. In response to the breakdown, Carney struck a measured tone. Canada recognizes that U.S. trade policy has fundamentally changed from what it was in previous decades. He emphasized that while Canada cannot control American decisions, there has been constructive progress on specific sectors like steel, aluminum, and energy. Canada stands ready to continue discussions when Americans are prepared to return.
For months, we have stressed the importance of distinguishing things we can control and things we can't control. We can't control the trade policy of the United States. We recognize that that policy has fundamentally changed from the policy in the 1980s, 1990s, 2000s. And it's a situation where the United States has tariffs against every one of their trading partners to different degrees. And it's in that context that our officials, my colleagues, have been working with their American colleagues on detailed, constructive negotiations, discussions on specific transactions, specific sectors, steel, aluminum, and energy. And a lot of progress has been made. And we stand ready to pick up on that progress and build on that progress when the Americans are ready to have those discussions, because it will be for the benefit of workers in the United States, workers in Canada, and families in both of our countries. Now, what we can control, absolutely, is how we build here at home, and that's the focus of Budget 2025, generational investment here in Canada. And what we can also control, or at least heavily influence, is developing new partnerships and opportunities, including with the economic giants of Asia, which is the focus of this.
The stakes couldn't be higher. 3/4 of Canadian exports go to the United States, making Canada's economy uniquely vulnerable to Trump's trade policies. Nearly 3.6 billion Canadian dollars worth of goods and services cross the border daily. Canada is America's second largest trading partner after Mexico, with the U.S. importing $412.7 billion worth of Canadian goods last year alone. But here's what makes this crisis so unprecedented. Canada is still the only G7 country that hasn't reached a trade deal with Trump since he began his tariff offensive. Every other major economy has found some accommodation with the American president, but Canada remains locked in an escalating conflict that shows no signs of resolution. Ford's decision to run the Reagan ad represents a fundamental shift in Canadian strategy. Instead of Carney's diplomatic approach, Ford chose confrontation, using America's own conservative hero to make the case against Trump's policies. It was a high-risk gamble that appears to have backfired spectacularly. The timing couldn't be worse. The two countries are preparing for a review of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, the trade deal Trump negotiated during his first term but has since soured on. With negotiations now terminated, that review process is in jeopardy, potentially unraveling one of North America's most important economic partnerships. Trump's reaction also reveals his sensitivity about the Supreme Court case challenging his tariff powers. The president is so invested in this legal battle that he said he'd like to attend oral arguments personally. By accusing Canada of trying to illegally influence the Supreme Court, Trump is essentially admitting that the Reagan ad hit its target, reaching American audiences with a powerful anti-tariff message at a crucial moment. The irony is thick. Reagan, the patron saint of American conservatism, spent much of his presidency promoting free trade and criticizing protectionist policies. His 1987 radio address was a full-throated defense of open markets and international commerce. Yet Trump, who claims Reagan's legacy, is pursuing exactly the kind of protectionist agenda that Reagan warned against. Ford's response to Trump's termination of talks was measured but defiant. On Friday, he announced that Ontario would pause the ad campaign starting Monday, but only after it runs during the weekend's World Series games. Our intention was always to initiate a conversation about the kind of economy that Americans want to build, Ford said. We've achieved our goal, having reached U.S. audiences at the highest levels. This calculated delay infuriated Trump even further. They could have pulled it tonight, he told reporters before departing for Asia. The president called Ontario's decision to wait until after the World Series dirty play, revealing just how much the advertisement had gotten under his skin. Carney, meanwhile, tried to salvage the diplomatic relationship. Canada is prepared to resume trade talks with the U.S. when the Americans are ready, he told reporters. But his measured tone couldn't hide the reality that his months of careful diplomacy had been undone by a single television commercial from a provincial premier. The broader implications are staggering. This incident has ignited a fierce debate within Canada about the right approach to dealing with Trump. Ford's supporters argue that his confrontational strategy succeeded in exposing the contradictions in Trump's trade policy and reaching American audiences with a powerful message. Critics contend that it was reckless brinksmanship that has damaged Canada's most important economic relationship. The Reagan ad controversy also highlights the deep cultural and political divisions within the Republican Party. Reagan's vision of America as a champion of free trade and international cooperation stands in stark contrast to Trump's nationalist, protectionist agenda. By forcing Republicans to choose between Reagan's legacy and Trump's policies, Ford exposed these tensions in a way that clearly made Trump uncomfortable. For American consumers, the stakes are enormous. Canada provides crucial resources that Americans depend on daily, from energy to raw materials to food products. The escalating tariff war is already driving up prices and creating supply chain disruptions. If this conflict continues to escalate, ordinary Americans will feel the impact in their wallets. The automotive sector is particularly vulnerable. Canada and the United States have deeply integrated auto manufacturing, with parts and vehicles crossing the border multiple times during production. Trump's 25% auto tariffs are disrupting these supply chains and forcing companies to make painful decisions about where to locate production. Energy is another flashpoint. Canada is a major supplier of oil and electricity to the United States. Ford has previously threatened to halt energy exports to America, which would send U.S. energy bills surging. While he backed down from that threat, the possibility remains on the table if the trade war continues to escalate. The international community is watching this crisis with growing alarm. America's trade disputes with China dominated headlines for years, but the breakdown in U.S.-Canada relations is potentially more destabilizing because of how integrated these two economies are. Other allies are taking notes about how Trump responds to criticism and whether traditional diplomatic channels remain effective. Looking ahead, the path to resolution seems unclear. Trump has terminated trade talks before, only to restart them when it suited his purposes. But his reaction to the Reagan ad suggests a level of personal animosity that may be harder to overcome. Ford's decision to continue running the ad through the weekend shows that he's not backing down easily. Carney faces a difficult choice. He can continue his diplomatic approach, hoping that Trump's anger will cool and negotiations can resume. Or he can adopt Ford's more confrontational strategy, risking further escalation but potentially forcing Trump to the negotiating table through economic pressure. The Supreme Court case adds another layer of complexity. If the court rules against Trump's tariff powers, it could force a fundamental restructuring of his trade policy. But if the court upholds his authority, it could embolden him to impose even more punitive measures on Canada and other trading partners. What's clear is that the Reagan ad has fundamentally changed the dynamic of U.S.-Canada relations. Ford's gamble succeeded in getting Trump's attention and exposing the contradictions in his trade policy, but it also triggered a diplomatic crisis that could have lasting consequences for both countries. The ultimate irony is that Reagan himself would likely have opposed Trump's tariff strategy. The former president believed deeply in the power of free markets and international trade to create prosperity. His 1987 radio address was a passionate defense of these principles that seem increasingly distant from today's Republican Party. As this crisis unfolds, one thing is certain: the special relationship between the United States and Canada, built over centuries of cooperation and shared prosperity, is facing its greatest test in generations. Whether it survives will depend on the wisdom and restraint of leaders on both sides of the border, qualities that seem in short supply as this trade war continues to escalate. The Reagan ad may have been just 60 seconds long, but its impact will be felt for months or years to come. Ford's bold gambit has reshaped North American trade relations and forced a reckoning with the true cost of Trump's protectionist agenda. Whether this leads to a better deal for both countries or a deeper spiral into economic conflict remains to be seen. But one thing is clear: the era of quiet diplomacy between these two neighbors is over, replaced by a new reality of public confrontation and escalating economic warfare.